Let's return to that investigation by BBC News, which we reported on earlier this hour, which found that drug crime has shifted from the big cities to the countryside. In the last 5 years, the number of offences in urban areas has fallen, but risen in rural ones. Dealers, known as county lines gangs because they operate across borders, have expanded their network into suburbs and smaller towns. Well, Tilia Lenz is a social worker and a consultant for the Pan, Dorset and Wiltshire Social Work Teaching Partnership. She's carrying out research into county lines. Tilia, thank you very much for being with us on BBC News. Let me ask you, first of all, what kinds of people are getting involved? What kind of youngsters are vulnerable to being drawn into drug running for these gangs?
Well, actually, all youngsters and all adults are vulnerable to being exploited by county lines gangs. Previously, we would have probably thought that mostly the young people that would have possibly been in care or would have been excluded from school were vulnerable. But what we are seeing now is that drug gangs have clocked up to that, and they're actually targeting anyone and anyone who would be vulnerable.
And what sort of examples are there that in your research of the sorts of places which are seeing kind of a rise in drug crime?
The police statistics say that certainly in the southwest, some areas have a higher rise now. So some coastal towns and smaller cities around the southwest have seen an increase in drugs being brought in.
I was looking at the figures that are on the BBC analysis, and it talks about the South Coast being particularly vulnerable. Bournemouth and Weymouth have both seen rises of at least 50% over the 5 years. Swanage, Bridport, which obviously are much smaller, Lyme Regis, Exeter in Devon and Redruth in Cornwall, all saw significant increases in drug crime. I suppose the question then, the challenge is how you try and reduce that, how you try and disrupt the gang's activity. What's the most effective policing work you've seen in this?
Well, I was very privileged and lucky to be able to go out with the West Dorset Police, who have a designated county lines team, and I went out on a observer patrol and spent the whole day with that team. And what I've been able to see is that they were doing what we call in social work relationship-based practice. So they had built up relationships with the local users, they had got to know them, and are clearly not treating them as criminals, but as people who need support and who need to be kept safe within the community. And this team is really targeting the drug dealers who are coming from the outside into the small coastal towns or into the small rural communities. And they're trying to support the victims of the exploitation and try to keep them safe, which in turn keeps whole communities safe.
Yes, and of course, along with those who are themselves victims of drugs by becoming addicts and addicted, and therefore the crimes that they may commit in order to fund their addiction is presumably an increasing problem. I'll ask you finally, do you think there is a kind of a longer term solution that we should be considering to this?
Well, at the moment, the research that I'm undertaking is around developing a risk assessment tool to support adults who may be vulnerable to exploitation, because at the moment there isn't one in the southwest, and I've not come across anything in this country so far. And I'm trying to pick up on the learning that we've had in children's services, where risk assessments have been developed along the lines of the child sexual exploitation risk assessment, and they've been adapted. So I'm trying to set up a multi-agency group to develop such a risk assessment, and we're hoping to pilot that in the nearer future.
Well, Tilia Lenz, good luck with that work. We'll keep fingers crossed that you're able to take that to producing a tool. Tilia there is Pan, Dorset and Wiltshire Social Work Teaching Partnership. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, the mother of the missing